The alarm bells screamed across Vithara Prime as Commander Velthar rushed through the crystal corridors of the Federation's command center. His forearms trembled as he read the latest reports streaming in from their outer colonies. Another star system had gone completely silent. Not destroyed, not conquered, simply erased from existence as if it never existed at all. The massive viewing screen flickered to life, showing the last transmission from Kepler Station. Velthar watched in horror as the recording played. Scientists and families went about their daily routines, children played in the artificial gardens, and researchers worked in their laboratories. Then the darkness came. It started as a shimmer, in space like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But this shimmer consumed everything it touched. The station's outer hull began dissolving, not exploding or burning, but simply ceasing to exist. The screams lasted only seconds before the communication array vanished into nothingness. 12 billion souls lived on that research station. Now there was only empty space where an entire world once thrived. Velthar's science officer, a tall crystalline being named Kethara, approached with trembling limbs. Her usually bright inner light had dimmed to barely a whisper. "Commander, we've run the calculations 3 times. The consumption rate is accelerating beyond all our models." The holographic display showed a 3-dimensional map of their galaxy sector. Red zones marked where the void spawn had already fed. The pattern was terrifying in its simplicity. They consumed everything, left nothing behind, and moved on to the next target with mechanical precision. "How long do we have?" Velthar asked, though he dreaded the answer. "At current acceleration rates, they'll reach our core worlds in 18 standard days," Kethara replied. "The inner colonies have perhaps a week." Velthar closed his primary eyes and tried to process the enormity of their situation. The Zilani Federation had existed for over 3,000 years. 7 different species working together in harmony, sharing knowledge and resources, exploring the galaxy with peaceful intentions. They had built wonders that defied imagination, cities that floated in gas-giant atmospheres, research stations that bent space-time to study distant galaxies, art forms that could only exist in zero gravity, all of it meaningless against an enemy that ate reality itself. The Federation's military, such as it was, consisted mainly of exploration vessels and colony defense ships. They had never needed true warships because they had never faced a true enemy. Their weapons were designed to clear asteroid fields or defend against the occasional pirate raid. Against the void spawn, these tools were worse than useless. They actually made the parasites stronger. The first military engagement had been a disaster. Admiral Zephon had led a fleet of 50 ships against a small void spawn cluster near the mining world of Tertius 7. The energy weapons that should have destroyed the parasites instead fed them, making them grow larger and more aggressive. The fleet's shields, powered by fusion reactors, became beacons that drew the creatures like moths to flame. Only 3 ships escaped that battle, and they brought back footage that still gave Velthar nightmares. The void spawn didn't just destroy ships, they unraveled them at the molecular level, converting matter into pure dark energy that made them even hungrier. Communication arrays across the Federation crackled with panicked transmissions. Refugee fleets fled toward the galactic rim, packed with billions of civilians who had never known fear like this. The Nexari, with their beautiful crystal ships, tried to use their advanced shielding technology. The energy beings from Proxima attempted to merge with the parasites and destroy them from within. The hive-minded collective threw wave after wave of drone ships at the advancing darkness. Nothing worked. Every strategy failed. Every weapon made things worse. Velthar walked to the massive observation deck that overlooked the capital city. Millions of beings from dozens of species lived and worked together in perfect harmony below. Floating platforms carried families to their homes in the crystal spires. Children attended schools, where they learned about art, science, and philosophy. Markets bustled with traders selling wonders from across the galaxy. In 18 days, all of this would be gone. Not destroyed in battle, not conquered by an enemy army, but simply erased as if it had never existed. The thought made his stomach twist in ways he didn't know were possible. The communications officer called out from her station, Commander, we're detecting something unusual in the Outer Rim territories. A small fleet of unknown vessels is moving. Against the void spawn advance, Velthar turned, hope flickering in his chest like a dying ember. Unknown species? What kind of ships? The energy signatures are primitive, sir. Chemical propulsion, basic fusion reactors, metal hulls instead of crystal matrices. But they're heading directly toward the largest void spawn concentration we've detected. A suicide mission, Velthar whispered. Another species choosing to die fighting rather than fleeing. He couldn't blame them. But as he watched the sensor readings, something impossible happened. The primitive ships engaged the void spawn and survived. Captain Hyunwoo stared at the tactical display aboard the battleship Seoul's Fury as 3 more star systems winked out of existence. The red zones on his holographic map spread like a disease, consuming everything in their path. His crew worked quietly around him, their faces grim with the knowledge of what they were about to face. Lieutenant Yoon-ji looked up from her sensor station, her young face pale with exhaustion. She had been tracking the void spawn movements for 72 hours straight, surviving on nothing but caffeine pills and determination. Captain, the consumption rate has doubled again. They're not just feeding anymore, they're multiplying. The Federation's distress signal had reached Earth 3 days ago, and the response had been immediate. Every available human warship was being pulled from patrol duties, defense assignments, and training missions. This wasn't just another military operation. This was potentially the last stand for an entire section of the galaxy. Hyunwoo had been fighting these creatures for 15 years, ever since they first appeared in the outer territories near human space. While the galaxy's advanced civilizations had enjoyed millennia of peace and prosperity, humanity had been locked in a brutal learning curve against an enemy that defied every rule of conventional warfare. The first human encounter with the Void spawn had been catastrophic. The colony ship New Busan had been carrying 50,000 settlers to establish a mining operation on a resource-rich world. The Void spawn had appeared without warning, and within minutes, the ship and everyone aboard had simply ceased to exist. No wreckage, no survivors, no trace that they had ever been there. That loss had changed everything for humanity. While other species might have retreated or sought diplomatic solutions, humans had done what they always did. When faced with an existential threat, they had learned to fight back. The weapons officer, Tae-min, bore the scars of those early battles. Half his face was covered in burn marks from a void spawn encounter that had gone wrong 5 years ago. His ship had been caught in a feeding frenzy, and only quick thinking and the experimental energy dampener had saved his crew. Now, he was one of humanity's leading experts on anti-void spawn tactics. "Sir, we're receiving updated intelligence from the reconnaissance drones," Tae-min reported. "The main swarm has grown to unprecedented size. They've consumed 2 entire Federation battle fleets that tried to engage them conventionally." Hyunwoo nodded grimly. The Federation's energy-based weapons were worse than useless against the Void spawn. They were like trying to fight fire with gasoline. Every shot fired, every shield raised, every power core activated just made the parasites stronger and hungrier. The bridge communications array crackled to life with incoming transmissions from the rest of the human fleet. Captain Soo-jin's voice came through clearly from her destroyer, the Incheon Defender. "Seoul's Fury, this is Soo-jin. My ship is loaded and ready for insertion. Absorption arrays are at full capacity." More voices followed, Captain Jae-hyun from the Daegu's Vengeance, Major Soo-bin leading the marine assault teams, Commander Ye-jin coordinating the support vessels. Dozens of ships, thousands of crew members, all preparing to face an enemy that had never been defeated in open combat. The human fleet looked nothing like the sleek, elegant vessels of the Federation. These were ugly, utilitarian warships built for one purpose: killing things that couldn't be killed by conventional means. Their hulls were scarred from countless battles, covered in heat sinks, energy dampeners, and weapon systems that most civilized species would consider primitive. But primitive didn't mean ineffective. Humanity had learned through trial and error, paying for every lesson with blood and lost ships. They had discovered that the void spawn couldn't process certain types of energy, that they became sluggish when gorged on trapped power, that kinetic weapons could damage them in ways energy weapons could not, Admiral Minho's voice echoed through the fleet communications network from his flagship, the Busan's Wrath. All ships, this is command. We're about to enter the combat zone. Remember? Your training. Trust your equipment and watch each other's backs. The Federation is counting on us to do what they cannot. The human fleet began its approach toward the Federation's core worlds, where the largest void spawn swarm in recorded history was preparing to feed. Long-range sensors showed the true scope of the disaster. Entire solar systems reduced to empty. Space, millions of refugee ships fleeing in all directions, and the dark tendrils of the swarm reaching out like hungry fingers toward the remaining populated worlds. As they drew closer, the communications officer picked up Federation military frequencies. The panic in the alien voices was unmistakable, even through the translation software. Ships were reporting system failures as the void spawn drained their power cores from impossible distances. Entire fleets were going dark as their crews abandoned ship rather than face consumption, but there was something else in those transmissions, a note of desperate hope. Word was spreading through the Federation channels about the strange ships from the galaxy's rim, the primitive vessels that somehow survived contact with the void spawn. The aliens didn't understand yet what they were seeing. They couldn't comprehend how such crude-looking ships could succeed where their advanced technology had failed. But they would learn soon enough that sometimes the most effective solutions came from the most unexpected places. Captain Su-Jin gripped the command chair as her ship, the Incheon Defender, dropped out of hyperspace right into the heart of chaos. The Federation flagship loomed ahead, a beautiful crystalline vessel that looked more like a work of art than a warship. Around it, smaller ships fired desperately at the dark shapes swarming through space like angry hornets. The void spawn scouts moved with terrifying intelligence, flowing around the Federation's energy shields and feeding on their power cores. Each blast from the alien weapons only made the parasites larger and more aggressive. Su-Jin watched as one Federation cruiser simply vanished, consumed so quickly that its final transmission cut off mid-word. "Captain, we're being hailed by the Federation flagship," her communications officer reported. The voice that came through the speakers was filled with panic and desperation. "Unknown vessel, this is Commander Velthar of the Zelani Federation. You must retreat immediately. These creatures cannot be fought with conventional weapons. They feed on energy itself." Su-Jin smiled grimly as she activated her reply channel. "Federation vessel, this is Captain Su-Jin of the Terran Defense Force. We're not here to retreat. All Federation ships fall back to a safe distance and observe." The bridge crew of the Incheon Defender moved with practiced efficiency, each person knowing their role in the deadly dance they were about to perform. Lieutenant Dong-hyun powered down the main engines, switching to backup chemical thrusters that produced almost no energy signature. The ship's fusion reactor dropped to minimal output, barely enough to maintain life support. "Energy dampeners. Online," called out the engineering officer. "Hull absorption arrays are active. We're going dark, Captain." On the Federation flagship, Commander Velthar watched in amazement as the human ship seemed to disappear from his sensors. The void spawn scouts, confused by the sudden lack of energy to feed on, began clustering around the strange vessel, like predators investigating potential prey. That's when the Incheon Defender revealed its true nature. Hidden ports snapped open along the ship's scarred hull, revealing magnetic railguns that had been completely powered down moments before. These weapons didn't use energy the way the Federation understood it. They used magnetic fields to accelerate solid tungsten slugs to incredible velocities. The first salvo tore through the void spawn cluster like bullets through tissue paper. The parasites, expecting energy they could consume and redirect, found themselves facing pure kinetic force that they couldn't process or absorb. The tungsten slugs punched through their dark forms, causing them to writhe and fragment, but Su-Jin wasn't finished. As the wounded void spawn began to disperse their energy in death throes, specialized collection arrays activated along the human ship's hull. These devices, developed through years of desperate research, trapped the escaping energy in quantum containment fields. "Absorption complete," reported the tactical officer. "We've captured 70% of their dispersed energy. Storage banks are at 15% capacity. The Federation crews watched in stunned silence as the human ship systematically hunted down the remaining scouts. Each engagement followed the same pattern. The ship would go dark, the void spawn would investigate, and then kinetic weapons would strike with brutal efficiency. Commander Velthar's science officer, Keth Ara, was frantically analyzing the human tactics. "It's impossible," she whispered. "They're using the parasite's own feeding mechanism against them. When the creatures die, instead of the energy dissipating into space, the humans are collecting it." What the Federation didn't understand was that this wasn't humanity's first encounter with the void spawn. For decades, human colonies on the Galactic Rim had been fighting a secret war against these creatures. Every tactic, every weapon, every strategy had been paid for with blood and lost worlds. The human ship Daegu's Vengeance appeared next, followed by the Soul's Pride and the Guangzhou's Hammer. Each vessel used the same deadly combination of energy dampening, kinetic weapons, and absorption technology. The Void Spawn Scouts, evolved to feed on energy-based civilizations, found themselves facing an enemy that fought with physics instead of power. Major Subin's voice crackled over the tactical channel from her assault transport. "Capital ships, this is Reaper Team. We're ready for surface insertion if you can clear us a path." Sujin checked her tactical display. The Federation world below was partially infected, with void spawn feeding on the planet's energy infrastructure. Standard orbital bombardment would be useless. It would only make the parasite stronger. But human Marines had developed techniques for ground combat that the galaxy had never seen. "Reaper Team, you're cleared for insertion. We'll provide cover. Fire with kinetic strikes only." The assault shuttles launched from the human fleet, their hulls covered in the same energy-dampening materials as the warships. As they descended toward the planet's surface, Federation observers could see human soldiers in environmental suits that looked primitive compared to their own advanced armor. But those suits had been designed specifically for void spawn combat. They used passive systems wherever possible, generated minimal energy signatures, and were equipped with weapons that relied on chemical reactions rather than power cells. On the surface, Major Subin led her teams through infected zones where the very air seemed to shimmer with dark energy. The void spawn had been feeding on the planet's power grid, growing larger and more aggressive with each passing hour. "Contact front," called out Sergeant Minjun as his squad encountered there. First ground-based parasite. The creature looked like a living shadow, reaching out with tendrils that could drain a man's life force in seconds. The human response was swift and brutal. Explosive charges detonated in carefully calculated sequences using concussive force to disrupt the parasite's energy matrix. Chemical flamethrowers followed up, burning with reactions that produced heat and light, but no electromagnetic energy the creatures could absorb. Within hours, the infection on the planet's surface was contained. The human ground teams had accomplished what Federation military doctrine said was impossible. They had fought the void spawn on their own terms and won. As the immediate threat passed, Commander Velthar opened a communication channel to the human fleet. "Captain Sujin, your tactics are unlike anything we have ever seen. How is this possible?" Sujin's reply was quiet but firm. "Commander, we've been fighting these things for 30 years. We learned the hard way that you can't fight energy with energy. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most effective ones." Admiral Minho stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Busan's Wrath, watching as human fleets moved through space like sharks hunting in dark waters. The massive viewscreen showed dozens of human warships executing maneuvers that would have been considered suicidal by any other species in the galaxy. They weren't running from the void spawn. They were actively hunting them. The Federation observers aboard his ship watched in stunned silence as Captain Jae-hyun's destroyer deliberately flew into the center of a void spawn feeding cluster. The aliens expected to see another ship consumed in seconds, but instead witnessed something that defied everything they knew about warfare. Commander Ye-jin turned from her tactical station, her face grim with concentration. "Admiral, absorption arrays across the fleet are at 90% capacity. The parasites are taking the bait exactly as predicted." The human strategy was elegant in its brutality, developed through decades of trial and error against an enemy that had seemed unbeatable. Every human ship carried specially designed energy sources, not to power weapons but to attract and trap the void spawn. When the parasites came to feed, they found themselves walking into carefully prepared snares. The key breakthrough had come 15 years ago when Dr. Park Young-soo, a physicist who had lost his entire family to a void spawn attack, made a crucial discovery. The parasites didn't just consume energy randomly, they followed specific patterns, preferring certain types of electromagnetic signatures over others. By creating artificial energy sources that mimicked their favorite food, humans could control where and when the creatures would attack. Captain Dongwook's cruiser, the Ulsan's Fury, demonstrated this technique perfectly. His ship broadcast a powerful energy signature that drew a massive void spawn cluster toward it, like moths to a flame. Just as the parasites prepared to feed, magnetic containment fields snapped shut around them, trapping them in quantum cages they couldn't escape. "Now," Dongwook commanded, and his ship's railguns opened fire at point-blank range. The trapped void spawn, heavy with absorbed energy and unable to maneuver, became sitting targets for kinetic weapons. Tungsten slugs tore through their forms, causing them to implode as their energy matrices collapsed. The chain reaction spread through the entire cluster, turning what should have been humanity's destruction into a devastating victory. On the surface of Vithara Prime, Major Subin led her Marines through the infected districts of the capital city. The void spawn had been feeding on the planet's power infrastructure for days, growing larger and more aggressive with each passing hour. The beautiful crystal spires that had once housed millions of Federation citizens now pulsed with dark energy as the parasites consumed everything they touched. Subin's environmental suit looked primitive compared to the Federation's advanced armor, but it had been designed specifically for this type of warfare. No energy shields, no powered systems that could be drained, just ceramic plates and chemical-powered life support that the void spawn couldn't detect or consume. "Reaper 6 to all teams," she spoke into her radio. "Remember, these things can sense active electronics from kilometers away. Stay low-tech and watch your energy signatures." Her squad moved through the ruins like ghosts, using hand signals and physical coordination instead of digital communication systems. Each Marine carried weapons that would have seemed ancient to the Federation: chemical explosive charges, flame, throwers that burned with reactions the void spawn couldn't absorb, and kinetic weapons that relied on springs and compressed air rather than power cells. The first contact came when Sergeant Jinwoo's team encountered a massive parasite feeding on a fusion reactor. The creature had grown to the size of a building, its dark tendrils reaching deep into the city's power grid. Standard military doctrine would have called for orbital bombardment, but that would only make it stronger. Instead, Jinwoo's Marines used a tactic that had been developed through countless battles in human space. They planted chemical charges around the creature's base, not to destroy it directly but to sever its connection to the power source. When the charges detonated, the parasite found itself suddenly cut off from its energy supply. Confused and weakened, the void spawn became vulnerable to conventional attacks. Flamethrowers burned through its outer layers, while kinetic weapons disrupted its internal structure. Within minutes, a creature that had terrorized an entire district was reduced to dissipating dark energy. Back in space, Admiral Minho coordinated the largest anti-void spawn operation in human history. His fleet had grown to over 300 ships, each one carrying weapons and tactics developed through 30 years of desperate innovation. They weren't just fighting to save the Federation, they were proving that the galaxy's greatest threat could be defeated. The Federation military observers struggled to understand what they were seeing. Commander Velthar watched as human ships deliberately allowed themselves to be swarmed by void spawn, only to trap entire clusters in containment fields and destroy them with coordinated kinetic strikes. "How is this possible?" he asked Admiral Minho. "Your weapons appear primitive, your ships lack our advanced shielding, yet you succeed where we have failed completely." Minho's expression was grim as he replied, "Commander, your species has known peace for thousands of years. You've built weapons to explore and defend, not to kill. We've spent 3 decades learning to fight an enemy that eats energy itself. We didn't choose this war, but we learned to win it." The truth was even more brutal than Minho admitted. humanity, hadn't developed these tactics through research and development. They had learned them through necessity, losing entire worlds and billions of lives in the process. The techniques that were now saving the Federation had been paid for with human blood, written in the ashes of burned colonies and dead ships. But that sacrifice was finally paying off. Across the star system, void spawn clusters were being systematically hunted down and destroyed by human forces, using tactics the galaxy had never imagined. What had seemed like humanity's primitive technology was actually the result of the most brutal education in warfare the universe had ever provided. The final battle began as billions of Federation citizens watched through quantum communication feeds, their fate hanging in the balance above their homeworld. The largest void spawn swarm in recorded history had gathered in the space around Zelani Prime, a writhing mass of dark energy that stretched across thousands of kilometers. Every parasite that had fed on the outer colonies was here, grown massive and hungry for the final feast. Captain Jae-hyun felt the weight of history pressing down on him as his ship, the Daegu's Vengeance, led the final assault formation. Behind him flew every available human warship, destroyers scarred from decades of combat, cruisers bristling with improvised weapons, and massive dreadnoughts that had been pulled from the deepest patrol routes to be here for this moment. The Federation flagship hung in the distance, its crystalline hull reflecting the light of the dying star. Commander Velthar's voice crackled over the communication channels, filled with desperate hope and barely controlled fear. "Human fleet, our sensors show the swarm has reached critical mass. If they complete their feeding cycle, they will become unstoppable." Jae-hyun checked his tactical display one final time. The void spawn weren't just randomly consuming energy anymore. They had formed into a coordinated organism, sharing power between individual parasites and growing stronger with each passing moment. This wasn't just a feeding frenzy. It was evolution in real time. "All ships, this is Daegu's Vengeance," he announced over the fleet-wide channel. "Execute Cascade Protocol on my mark. Remember, we only get one chance at this." The Cascade Protocol represented 30 years of human innovation against an impossible enemy. Every lesson learned from lost worlds, every tactic developed through desperate battles, every sacrifice made by crews who died learning how to kill the unkillable, all of it had led to this moment. The protocol began with what appeared to be madness. Every human ship in the fleet suddenly blazed with artificial energy signatures, their hulls lighting up like beacons in the darkness of space. Emergency reactors activated, power cores overcharged, and energy weapons fired harmlessly into empty space. To any observer, it looked like the humans had lost their minds. The void spawn reaction was immediate and predictable. The massive swarm surged toward the human fleet like a tidal wave of pure hunger, abandoning their careful consumption of the planet below in favor of this unexpected banquet. Parasites that had been methodically draining the Federation's power infrastructure suddenly broke formation and raced toward the human ships. Commander Ye-jin watched the energy readings from her position aboard the Soul's Fury. "Admiral Minho, swarm velocity is increasing beyond all projections. They're moving faster than we've ever recorded." "Perfect," Minho replied grimly. "The hungrier they are, the better this works." The first void spawn reached the human fleet and began feeding immediately, their dark tendrils wrapping around ship hulls and draining the artificial energy sources. More parasites followed, then hundreds more, until the entire swarm was engaged in a massive feeding frenzy around the human vessels. That's when Jae-hyun gave the order that would either save the galaxy or doom them all. "All ships, activate containment fields now." Across the fleet, quantum containment arrays that had been hidden throughout each ship's hull suddenly snapped to life. The void spawn, gorged on artificial energy and moving too fast to react, found themselves trapped in overlapping energy matrices that they couldn't escape or consume. The parasites writhed and struggled, but they had made a fatal mistake. In their hunger, they had absorbed energy that was specifically designed to make them heavy and sluggish. The artificial power sources weren't just bait, they were poison that slowed their reactions and clouded their primitive intelligence. "Major." Zubin's voice crackled over the tactical channel from the marine assault ship. Capital ships, the surface teams report all civilians have been evacuated to safe zones. You are cleared for kinetic bombardment. What happened next would be talked about in Federation military academies for generations. Every human ship in Ma. The fleet opened fire simultaneously, not with energy weapons that the void spawn could absorb, but with pure kinetic force that they couldn't process or redirect. Railguns fired thousands of tungsten slugs in perfect synchronization. Mass drivers launched solid metal projectiles at relativistic speeds. Chemical explosives detonated in carefully calculated sequences that created shockwaves through the trapped swarm. The void spawn, heavy with absorbed energy and unable to escape. Their quantum prisons began to implode. The chain reaction spread through their ranks like wildfire as each dying parasite released the energy it had consumed back into space. But instead of dissipating harmlessly, that energy was immediately captured by human absorption arrays and redirected as kinetic force against the remaining parasites. Captain Su-jin watched from the bridge of the Incheon Defender as reality itself seemed to bend around the dying swarm. "My God," she whispered, "we're not just killing them, we're using their own feeding mechanism to destroy them all." The battle lasted less than an hour, but the aftermath would echo through galactic history forever. Where the largest void spawn swarm in recorded history had once threatened to consume an entire star system, now there was only empty space filled with clouds of recoverable matter, the remains of worlds and ships that the parasites had consumed. Over centuries of feeding. As the human fleet began recovery operations, Commander Velthar finally understood the true cost of their salvation. In the weeks that followed, he learned the history that humanity had never shared with the galaxy. The species they had dismissed as primitive had been fighting the void spawn for 3 decades, losing entire colonies and billions of lives in the process. The techniques that saved the Federation had been developed through necessity, written in blood and paid for with worlds that no longer existed. Humanity hadn't chosen to become warriors against the impossible. They had been forced into that role by an enemy that threatened everything they loved. When the Federation Council offered humanity a place among the galactic powers, Admiral Minho's response was simple and devastating. "We appreciate the honor, but our work isn't finished. There are other galaxies, other species who will face what you faced." The hunt continues. The human fleets departed as quietly as they had arrived, carrying their hard-won knowledge to distant stars where new battles waited. The galaxy was safe, but the price of that safety would never be forgotten.